It's no secret that Manchester City are having a very difficult time this season, with them leaking goals left, right and centre and losing by embarrassing scorelines on multiple occasions across all competitions, which is unheard of from a Pep Guardiola team. And a lot of people have been left stunned by this drastic drop in form, but this Manchester City downfall isn't actually as unexpected as many people think it is, with the cracks starting to show as early as last season. And in today's video, we'll be diving deeper into one of the biggest issues in the Manchester City squad that has been exposed by Rodri's ACL injury earlier in the season. But before I go any further into today's video, please do like the video if you're enjoying this Manchester City downfall, and also comment your thoughts on the City midfield options in the comments below. But most importantly, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, to try help the channel finally reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support is very much appreciated. I won't be able to do this without you guys. But with all that being said, let's get into today's video and look at Manchester City's midfield problem. Let's take a trip back to the start of last season. Manchester City have just won the treble and were preparing to defend the Premier League title for a historic 4th year in a row. And things would get off to a flying start, with City picking up exactly where they left off at the end of last season, with them winning their opening 5 matches, scoring 14 goals and only conceding 3. With players like Haaland, Alvarez and Rodri having key roles in Man City's explosive start to the Premier League season. So who could possibly stop this City side? Well, the answer is themselves. Because in game week 6 of the Premier League, Manchester City would host Nottingham Forest at the Etihad Stadium, in what looked to be a comfortable win for the citizens, with Foden opening the score in 7 minutes in and Haaland doubling the lead just 7 minutes later. City looked to be cruising to a routine win to keep their perfect record at the start of the season alive. But that was until the 47th minute, where Rodri decided to make things just a little bit more interesting by getting himself a straight red card after an altercation with Morgan Gibbs-White. This moment of madness would not have an impact on the outcome of the game, however, with City still seeing out the 2-0 win, but as a result of the red card, Rodri would face a 3-match ban. This would include 1 League Cup game against Newcastle and 2 league games against Wolves and Arsenal. But Rodri's only one player. His absence couldn't possibly have that big of an impact on the best team in Europe, could it? Well, the answer is yes, because City would lose all 3 of the following fixtures in Rodri's absence, with Calvin Phillips and Mateo Kovacic struggling to deputise for the Spaniard. And following the losses to Wolves and Arsenal, City would only go on to lose 1 more game in the Premier League, against Aston Villa, which, yes, you guessed it, Rodri would miss due to suspension. And despite being crowned champions for a 4th year in a row after a 3-1 win against West Ham on the final day of the season, Manchester City's Achilles heel had finally been exposed. Eliminate Rodri, and Manchester City are just an average Premier League side. But as the summer transfer window approached, it was very clear to many City fans that there was one area that the club needed to strengthen in, with that of course being in the 6th position, more specifically finding an adequate backup for Rodri. It had become very clear that since the departure of Fernandinho in 2022, City had become heavily dependent on Rodri in the holding midfield position, with Rodri playing 56 games with a total of 4,478 minutes in the 2022-23 season, and a further 50 matches with a total of 4,327 minutes in the 2023-24 season. This would lead to Rodri himself coming out and saying that the amount of football he had played in the last 2 seasons was unsustainable.
Between 40 and 50 is the amount of games in which a player can perform in the highest level. After that, everything comes, you drop, because it's impossible to sustain the physical level.
With Rodri himself even indirectly calling for the club to sign depth in his position, you'd think it would be at the top of the club's priorities in the summer. Well, it was actually quite the opposite, with City only signing 2 senior players in the transfer window, with one of them being young Brazilian winger Savinho from Troyes in France for £20 million, and former Manchester City captain Ilkay Gundogan on a free from Barcelona, with Pep Guardiola later revealing that he asked the club not to sign any players because he wanted to work with an, in quotes, smaller squad. Despite the lack of reinforcements in the summer, City were once again off to a flying start in the Premier League, with them winning 4 out of their first 4 league games. But things would take a drastic turn for the worst in game week 5, and 21 minutes into City's game against fellow title challengers Arsenal, Rodri would go down after a challenge from Thomas Partey, leading to him being stretchered off, with the severity of the situation yet to be revealed. But the news of this injury would break the internet, with it being confirmed that Rodri had ruptured his ACL and his season was over. Finished. But this wouldn't just end Rodri's season, it would also be the beginning of the end of Manchester City's dominance over the Premier League. But the question is, how is a midfield full of world-class players and proven winners struggling to deal with the absence of just one player? The return of the treble-winning captain was the highlight of Manchester City's summer, with fans eagerly awaiting his first appearance back in a City shirt. But the high expectations held by City fans would go unfulfilled, with the return of Gundogan being nothing short of a disaster. There are many different factors that go into Gundogan's disastrous return to Manchester, but the main reason Gundogan is having such a horrid time at City is because of his physical decline in the last few years, which is obviously to be expected, with the German being 34 years of age as of recording this video. And the Premier League is a very physical league which values physicality and athleticism over technical ability compared to some leagues like La Liga. And with Gundogan's inability to track runs and cut passing lanes due to his lack of speed, it puts City at a disadvantage defensively. But his lack of pace also prevents him from making his signature late runs into the box, which really made him a fan favourite at the Etihad. And Gundogan is also one of many City players failing to take risks in the final third, with him pretty much playing every pass that he attempts going backwards, sideways, with him almost suffering from a fear of losing the ball. With the German lacking athleticism and failing to take risks, it renders him pretty much useless in the Manchester City midfield, with his two best traits being his attacking movement and his passing being non-existent due to his lack of speed and risk-taking. But Gundogan isn't the only player that is hindering Manchester City's performances in the midfield, despite him being the popular scapegoat at the start of Manchester City's poor run of form.
Do you get it, Bernard? The final question.
The second player on the list is Bernardo Silva, who once upon a time was one of Manchester City's most important players, not just in the midfield area but across the whole team. This was because he was a player that brought an immense amount of energy into the team, with him even being nicknamed the Duracell Bunny because of the amount of ground that he would cover in the centre of the park week in, week out. With Bernardo averaging 11.8 kilometers per 90 in the 2022-23 season, and then a further 10.8 kilometers per 90 in the 2023-24 season. Silva was also well renowned for his technical ability, with it being extremely difficult to dispossess him of the ball because the ball would stick to his feet like glue. And now in the year of 2025, Bernardo is a shell of his former self, with fans becoming more and more frustrated with him killing counter-attacks by constantly passing the ball backwards and sideways, while players like Savinho, Omar Mamouche and Haaland make runs in behind. Bernardo Silva only completes 4.75 progressive passes per 90 with an expected assist rate of 0.18 per 90. And it just shows that Bernardo isn't causing the opposition backline any problems, with him choosing to pass backwards 90% of the time, with him playing football almost as if it's a game of rugby. But despite the lack of urgency in his game, Bernardo will be one of Pep's first choices to sub on while City are chasing the game and needing a goal. And that fact alone says a lot about the position Man City are in right now when it comes to playmaking ability in the midfield.
With a space opening up for him. What a hit!
Mateo Kovacic is a very similar profile to Bernardo Silva, with his main focus on the pitch being ball retention and recycling possession, which on paper sounds like the perfect midfielder for a Pep Guardiola team. But the issue of Kovacic at Manchester City is he struggles with a lot of the other aspects of the game. The main issue of Kovacic is when he's made to play in the 6th position to deputise for Rodri. This is because he's extremely rash and has a lack of defensive discipline. Kovacic struggles to play in the 6th position against elite opposition, with his decision making being a cause for concern and his reading of the game being subpar. The 1-0 loss against Arsenal last season is the perfect case study as to why Kovacic can't be trusted with defensive responsibility. But it's not just his defensive capabilities that are at the detriment to City's performances, but it's his lack of attacking qualities that are also hindering City in transition. The main reason for this is because of Mateo's lack of vision and forward passing range, with the Croatian rarely attempting progressive passes, and even when he does attempt them, they're rarely ever successful. But I do think Kovacic is the perfect player to have in the team when Rodri is fully fit, because Rodri's defensive stability allows Kovacic to focus on keeping the ball and dictating the tempo of the match. But when he's forced to play in a more defensive role, it really does start to show the flaws in his game.
Cleared by Dummett. To Bruyne! Oh, that is outstanding!
Crazy to even be mentioning this man's name in a video about problems at Manchester City, but here we are. De Bruyne is one of the best, if not the best player the Premier League has ever seen, and the quality is still there, as he demonstrated in a 3-0 win against Notts Forest, where he completely ran the show to put Man City's 6-game winless run to an end. But the issue of Kevin De Bruyne becomes more apparent when you look at his recent fitness and injury record, and how despite his decline in physical ability, the City midfield is still extremely dependent on him in a creative department. And when KDB is out injured, the Man City midfield look creatively bankrupt, and with his fitness continuing to decline, he is absent from the starting 11 more and more. And just like Rodri, no one in the Man City squad has the ability to step up in De Bruyne's absence, despite players like Foden being held as a long-term replacement to him at Manchester City. So now that I've laid out all the current issues at Manchester City, how can Pep Guardiola solve these issues and get Manchester City back to winning ways? Firstly, the team needs more risk takers in the midfield area because only one of the 4 midfielders I mentioned previously has the bottle to take risks with their passes and risk losing possession, which for a team that will face low blocks in 90% of the matches they play, that just isn't good enough. And one of the solutions to this issue is by putting more responsibility on James McAtee in the starting 11 ahead of a player like Kovacic or Gundogan, because although McAtee might not always make the right decision or complete every pass that he attempts, he at least takes risks and tries to advance the ball up the field. Plus, I would rather watch a young player make mistakes but also continue to develop and grow compared to an uncle like Kovacic who is making mistakes and doesn't have any time or room to improve in the future. McAtee also has more goals than the rest of the Manchester City midfielders this season in considerably less minutes, which shows he's more of an attacking threat. And January signing Nico Gonzalez is also one of the very few positives to come out of this season, with him signing for £50 million from Porto on transfer deadline day, and this signing was huge. City finally had a player that could play in the 6th position while Rodri was injured. Nico would tick all the boxes that City were missing in the middle of the park, with him only being 23 years of age, making him the 2nd youngest midfielder in the first team. He is press resistant and composed on the ball under pressure, and he is also a strong ball carrier who is capable of running with the ball up the field unlike other players in the squad. But he's also got a very good passing range, with being able to break defensive lines with short and long passes. This is the exact profile of player that City would have been missing in Rodri's absence, and even when Rodri returns from injury, Nico can help lighten Rodri's workload going forward and develop himself into one of the best midfielders in the world. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think, so please do leave your thoughts on the video and opinions on the current Manchester City midfield situation in the comments below. And obviously like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to help the channel finally reach 1,000 subscribers. And if it's the first time you've watched one of my videos, please do check out the rest of the videos on the channel. I'd highly recommend watching my video on Rory Jennings. But with all that being said, I've been Nathan, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Shut down cases, they belly dots to the can't see faces, chasing the bad guy chase it. You don't wanna be the one like Ace and like G-Take trying to turn him out waste.